Sir, thanks for your service. I saw you tapping with that Anchors Away song. So, some things you can't forget. Now I'd like to collectively recognize all members of the World War II generation. There may be others attending today's ceremony in person or those watching online. Please stand or wave from your seats as you're able so we can recognize you. Let's give them a round of applause. For members of that World War II generation, it's our honor to pay tribute to you and to your service every day here at this museum. We also would like to recognize all other veterans, active duty military in attendance today. Please stand or wave and be recognized. Today, we'd also like to recognize military family members, as their sacrifice and strength play a vital role in supporting our nation's service members through long deployments, constant uncertainty, and other hardships. Please stand or wave if you are the parent, spouse, or child of a military service member. Now today we also are joined by Gold Star mother and wife, Gail Joyce. Gail, thank you for traveling to be with us here today, and we very much look forward to hearing from you later in the program. Thank you, Joyce. Now, Gail, you and all other Gold Star family members in attendance whose loved ones made the ultimate sacrifice, thank you very much. Other Gold Star family members, would you also stand or wave and be recognized? Now, before today's ceremony, you heard a performance from the American Legion Post 377 band, many of whom are veterans, as you saw. If you missed their performance, be sure to stick around as they'll be performing again at the conclusion of the program. But please join me in a round of applause, thanking the American Legion Post 377. It is now my distinct privilege to welcome to the stage the CEO and President of the National World War II Museum, Steve Watson.
Good morning. Good morning. And thank you, Mike, and thank you to all of you for being here on this most important day. So, of course, every Memorial Day we gather to remember those who gave their lives on the battlefields throughout American history. In World War II alone, 414,920 American service members and merchant mariners did not return home to their families. Here at the National World War II Museum, we understand the importance of ensuring that their sacrifice was not in vain, and that future generations will hear their stories of those who fought valiantly to defend freedom. Our museum will continue to tell these important stories of valor and selflessness, not just on Memorial Day, but every day, through our exhibits, our galleries, our programs, our educational resources, and through a very important partnership with the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, which searches for, locates, identifies, and buries missing military personnel according to the wishes of their families. Almost 80 years after the end of the war, there are still over 70,000 World War II veterans unaccounted for. And it is our distinct privilege to support DPAA in their quest to bring these veterans home. I stopped and think about that for a moment. We live in a country that 80 years after the fighting was over, we are still searching for the man that served our country, and we will not stop searching until we bring everyone home that we can. We live in a great country, ladies and gentlemen. One of those stories is highlighted in our new Liberation Pavilion in the Cost of Victory Gallery, and it really embodies the sacrifice these service members and their families have made. First Lieutenant Shannon E. Estill was a member of the 428th Fighter Squadron. His P-38 fighter aircraft went down on April 13th, 1945, in the closing days of the war. At that time, he was listed as missing in action. But 60 years later, his remains were positively identified. Lieutenant Estill's daughter is now a trustee of the National World War II Museum, Dr. Sharon Estill Taylor, and she was just 3 weeks old when her father was killed. We recognize that Gold Star family members, like the Estill family, who have lost a loved one in service, carry the deepest burden on Memorial Day. Across the country and throughout our history, they have felt the true cost of war and conflict. Mothers, fathers, spouses, children, aunts, uncles, and grandparents alike. One of the ways that the museum recognizes the sacrifice of these family members is through our Gold Star Families Memorial Monument. It's located on the Judith W. and Lewis M. Freeman Liberation Terrace. Right next to the Liberation Terrace, there's a beautiful stairwell that takes you up to the second floor. And I encourage each of you to visit this monument before you leave today and take a moment to reflect on the brave men and women and their families who have given so much in service to our nation. As Mike said, we are deeply honored to be joined today by Gail Joyce. Gail was the devoted wife of U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Larry Joyce, who died from the effects of Agent Orange exposure during the Vietnam War, and the proud mother of U.S. Army Sergeant James Casey Joyce, who was tragically killed in action at the age of 24 in Mogadishu, Somalia. Both of these brave men are no longer with us. Her husband, due to the invisible wounds carried home from his service in Vietnam, and her son, who gave his life in faithful service to our country. Gail is joined today by her daughter, Sanzi Joyce, and son-in-law, Bill Brown. We thank you both for being here and for sharing your family's story. In addition to her dedicated support for her family and holding various roles across the country, Gail has served as a board member of the Military Officers Association of America and chairs its Surviving Spouse Advisory Council. From 2012 to 2020, Gail led the Memorial Day Fields of Flags initiative, which played a vital role in organizing meaningful Memorial Day ceremonies and honoring the sacrifices of our nation's heroes. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mrs. Gail Joyce. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am so proud and happy to be here today to share not only my story, but the story of my husband and my son with you. Sergeant Eversman. Sergeant Thomas. Sergeant Joyce. Sergeant James Joyce. Sergeant James Casey Joyce. My heart was breaking, and tears were streaming down my face as taps was playing. This was the final act. This, the last roll call, a military tradition that pays honor to a soldier who has died, and it was performed at a memorial service at Fort Benning, Georgia, November 1993, when the Ranger unit came home. It paid homage to the 6 Rangers who were killed in the Battle of Mogadishu, or better known as Black Hawk Down. You know what? That memory still haunts me still. More than when my husband, who was in Chicago, told me when I was in San Diego over the phone that Casey was dead. More than having the circumstances of Casey's death repeated to me again and again in a debriefing by 4 young men with whom he had served and his commanding officers. More than his very highly publicized burial at Arlington National Cemetery. And even more than his memorial service in Plano, Texas, his hometown. You know, this memory continues to stop my heart because it was so absolutely final. You know, you just can't grasp, you just don't grasp what has happened. He's not still coming home. He won't be home. And it's just not gonna happen. We'd received a letter from Casey just a few days before saying that he would be coming home. And he would be coming home soon. And he did come home with 17 others who had died, 5 who were Rangers, and dozens who were severely wounded. But Casey is at home always, always in my heart. And this Memorial Day, I would like to share some of my really special memories of Casey, because when I talk about him, he lives, and he lives once again for me. I remember Casey in so many different ways every single day. And this bracelet that I wear that I've worn for 32 years, and the many pictures of him that are hanging on the wall and sitting around. I remember him as a precocious child, impatient and inquisitive. He crawled at 4 months, he walked at 8 months, and he weighed 31 pounds at 1 year. He had a great sense of humor, a pretty ferocious temper. He was always busy, and he seldom ever slept. He was also a professional mascot. He was a mascot of every youth team his dad coached, his brother Steve played on, and his sister Sancy cheered for. I remember him as a handsome teenager on his first date and going to his very first prom. He loved to bring his friends home with him, and many nights Casey was driving home at 11 o'clock, his curfew time. He would get us out of bed to come play Yahtzee or Scrabble or Monopoly with him and with his friends. I remember him going off to Ranger training and writing home about what he wanted to eat when he got out. Bacon, sausage, eggs, biscuits, gravy, chocolate chip pancakes, and a chocolate chip milkshake and some orange juice, and all of this was just for breakfast. I had my marching orders. You know, he loved Texas. He loved the Dallas Cowboys, and he especially loved his wife, Deanna, and his family. But he especially loved and admired his dad. Larry was Casey's best man at his wedding, and Larry delivered Casey's eulogy at his memorial service in Plano, just because Casey had requested it. Our son, James Casey Joyce, 24 years old, U.S. Army Ranger, died on October the 3rd, 1993, in Mogadishu, Somalia, in the worst firefight since Vietnam. 18 young men lost their lives that day. 6 were from Casey's unit, the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, from Fort Benning, Georgia. That was 31 years, 7 months, 23 days ago, and you know what? It still seems just like yesterday. You know, I don't need Memorial Day to serve as a reminder to me of the awful price that we sometimes must pay in pursuit of freedom to uphold our democratic principles, and when we put our young people in harm's way. I'm reminded every single day of our family's great loss, just by the fact that Casey's not here with us anymore, to laugh with, to argue with, to watch a Dallas Cowboys game with, to talk about movies or books with, to witness his becoming a father, perhaps a teacher and a coach, or maybe even a writer. But for me, this day, Memorial Day, is my opportunity to remind everyone in every way that I can, from speaking to events like this, to writing about him, to giving interviews, and to working on special memorials. You know, it is my goal to get every single person to remember Somalia, to remember Casey and those 5 Rangers who died that day in combat along with him. Dominic, 25, Jamie, 21, Lorenzo, 22, Kowalski, 19, Gavasso, 24. Oh my goodness, they were all so very young. You know, Casey died a hero, and he, along with several other Rangers, were awarded the Silver Star, which is the 3rd highest military award that one can receive. We received it in his place at a ceremony at Fort Benning, Georgia, on October the 3rd, 2018. And the citation reads, "For gallantry in action." A young soldier, Todd Blackburn, new to the Ranger unit, who's only 19 years old, fell 75 feet as he tried to fast rope out of the helicopter. He was severely wounded, and initially on the ground, everyone thought that he had died. But Casey was instrumental in getting Blackburn to safety and to medical care. He organized a team, and they got Blackburn on a stretcher and started moving him under intense enemy fire. They would run, put the stretcher down, kneel and fire, pick him up, run, kneel, fire, and repeat the process over and over again. Finally, Casey said, "We're gonna kill him if we keep doing this. I'm gonna find some transportation to get him to medical care quicker and safely." So Casey did that, constantly dodging really heavy enemy fire. He returned with transportation, and they loaded Blackburn in the Humvee. And Casey quickly returned to his original blocking position by a downed helicopter. He was getting fired from all angles when he was shot in the back by a sniper. And from all accounts, he died immediately. You see, there was not a back plate in his protective flak vest. You know, I later met Todd Blackburn at the showing of Black Hawk Down at Fort Benning in January of 2002. It had taken Blackburn 2 years to recover from a broken back, broken leg, and serious head and internal injuries. And he had to learn to walk and talk all over again. Todd walked up to me and he gave me this great big hug, and he said, "Thank you. Thank you for your son Casey and his efforts. I would not be here today if not for him. And I want you to meet someone special, my daughter." He then introduced me to the little girl standing beside him, and her name is Casey. You know, that is one of those wonderful, really life-giving gifts that keep coming back to me as a result of Casey's ultimate sacrifice, a gift for which I am forever grateful. In the fall of 1993, our life was as close to being perfect as it's ever been. 3 years earlier, Larry and I had moved to Chicago from Plano for a great job opportunity for him, and we were empty nesters. Casey, our youngest son, had decided to join the Army after 3 years in college. Larry tried his best to talk him out of it, at least wait to commit to the Rangers. We just felt he wasn't cut out for it. His life had been entirely too comfortable up to that point, and as the youngest of 3 who appeared later in our life, he was very spoiled. But he was not to be deterred. Our 2 other children seemed to be settled and doing just fine. Steve and his wife and 3 little ones were living in Atlanta at the time, and Sancy, a graduate of the University of Texas, was the emergency room nurse in Austin. And I had a wonderful job that I was able to take to Chicago with me. Oh, such memories. On October the 3rd, a Sunday, I was in California on a business trip, and while there, I'd taken the opportunity to spend some time with my sisters who lived in the San Diego area. That day, Larry had a 7:30 a.m. tee time at a 9-hole municipal golf course that ran along Lake Michigan. The weather was cool and beautiful in both Chicago and in San Diego, but it was a hot and dusty afternoon in Mogadishu, Somalia, where Casey and his Ranger and Delta Force comrades were taken off in helicopters en route to a raid that would result in the deadliest military battle since Vietnam, an operation that became known as by the book and movie title, Black Hawk Down. While Larry was playing on the 3rd green in Chicago and my sisters and I were taking an early morning walk in San Diego, Casey was dodging AK-47 rounds as he was rescuing Private PFC Todd Blackburn. As Larry was trying to get out of the rough and onto the fifth fairway, and my sisters and I were doing a little sightseeing, and Casey was fighting his way to the crash site of a back helicopter that had just been shot down. You know, the Rangers led by a very special creed. They would exhaust every means possible to keep their comrade dead or alive from falling into enemy hands. You know, as Larry finished his golf game and my sisters and I were eating some fried lobster in a tiny coastal Mexican village, some of our son's buddies were fighting their way back to Mogadishu Airport in a Humvee with Casey's lifeless body on board. Later, unaware of this devastating tragedy, Larry and I separated by over 2,000 miles while watching the news on CNN when word began to filter in about the initial raid. There were reports about casualties. I was confused and I was worried about what had happened, but it was late and I didn't want to wake Larry. I figured he was already asleep, and besides that, you know, no news is good news. Then President Clinton, who was coincidentally in California at the time, was on TV expressing his condolences to the families who had suffered losses. The same question hit Larry in Chicago and me in San Diego. Does that mean the families have all been notified? I was hopeful, but Larry's experiences told him no. I finally went to bed, but I couldn't sleep, and then I heard the phone ring, and my heart stopped, and I knew. Our life as we had known it would never, ever be the same again. Casey, so funny, so passionate, so patriotic, so full of life, so full of promise, was now physically gone from our life, but never, ever from our loving memories. You know, Larry had 2 tours in Vietnam, one as an advisor to a Vietnamese battalion, and the second one as an Army aviator, where he expected to get shot at every single day. And he came home both times without so much as a scratch. Casey's death was a terrible, terrible time for us, and one I just still can't make much sense of. Why? In 1995, we returned to Dallas after 5 years in Chicago. After Casey's death, we just finally decided we needed to be back home with family and friends. And 2 very short years later, we were shocked to learn that Larry, normally a very healthy and physically fit individual, was seriously ill. He was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, a common form of leukemia for children with a very high cure rate, but a very rare disease for a male in his late 50s. And the grieving process for me began all over again. You know, after a hard-fought and a very courageous battle with that terrible disease, he died 2.5 years later at home at the very young age of 60. On April the 3rd, 1999, just 13 days after we had just celebrated our 39th wedding anniversary. You know, I often said that Larry, infantry, Army aviator, public affairs officer, died as a result of 2 military conflicts. His time that he spent in Vietnam, where he was exposed to Agent Orange, and then later Somalia, from the stress, anger, and grief that he experienced as a result of Casey's death, which allowed the Agent Orange to rear its ugly head. You know, and several years later, I did learn from the Veterans Administration that they had declared Larry's illness to have been caused by exposure to Agent Orange during his 2 tours in Vietnam, and therefore his death was determined to be service-related. You know, Larry spent the last years of his life writing articles that appeared in every major newspaper and news magazine, and appearing on national TV shows, and testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee, and finally meeting with President Clinton to call attention to what he thought went wrong in Somalia, and to seek change in American policy involving the use of military personnel in peacekeeping operations. He waged a very visible and articulate, but sometimes angry campaign. In the end, he did make a difference, and there were some good changes that were made. But my memories of Larry's time with his illness, they're not all sad ones. He was a great patient. He always was so positive. He had a great outlook on life, and he had a real can-do attitude. Even sick, he was convinced he was going to live forever. He came from a long line of long livers. His grandmother lived to be 105, and both of his parents were in their late 90s when they died. And we used to joke that he would outlive me, and then all the women in the area would be after him, bringing him casseroles and offers of companionship. You know, he was so easy to care for, and he was also a really big jokester. Before he died, Larry got his uniform out, and he got his medals all polished and pinned on his jacket, and even hung a coat and a tie, a skirt and a tie with it, and he put some shoes and socks in a bag. So we would not have to look for anything when the time came, because we knew it was imminent. When the funeral came to pick him up at home, they asked if we had closer, and we said yes, and so my daughter ran and got them and brought them back, and the representative looked in the bag, and out fell a pair of purple polka dot underwear. Everyone laughed till we cried, because we just could see Larry laughing to himself as he filled that bag, knowing what the reaction would be from the people that saw it. Larry had made arrangements to have his body buried at Arlington National Cemetery because he wanted to be buried close to Casey. And that's where they both are now, just a few feet from each other. And I visit them every time I'm in Washington, D.C. or in Virginia. And I usually take some bluebonnets along because that was Casey's favorite flower. Close in life, they are now together forever. You know, I'm asked often, how do you get over losses like these, so unexpected, so unpredictable? And as some of you are well aware, you never, ever get over it. Grief is a really unique and it's a very personal journey, and so you find your ways to live your life despite your loss. And for me, it was the support and love from my family and friends. It was the prayers that I prayed as I asked for the courage and the strength just to get through each day. And then later it was the projects that I discovered where I could actually help others. And now it is the talks and the shared memories of Larry and Casey. Just like today, whenever and wherever I can, I talk about them and my struggles, and I find others who can share and relate with my experiences. You never, ever forget what you lost, whether it's your mom, your dad, your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife. But you learn to value what you have. And so here I am, and I think in many ways I'm stronger because of all the challenges and unexpected events in my life. You know, my life as a surviving spouse has been okay, and as a Gold Star mom. But it's something that I would have never, ever chosen. But sometimes you just don't have a choice. And since when I got through that initial phase of grief and loss, I have managed to stay busy, especially working with surviving spouses and grieving parents and veterans and their survivors, and helping them to find their way. You know, one of the really sad things about remembering today is that not only have so many died in service to their country, but that the majority were so young. We cannot escape the fact that it is the youth who bear the burden of war. You know, Gold Star families are living examples of that terrible, terrible experience, and they are representative of all those who died in Vietnam, over 55,000, and now thousands more who have died later as a result of Vietnam. But we remember. In Iraq and Afghanistan, over 7,000 at last count, and we remember them. And then there are the 30,000 U.S. service members and veterans of the post-9/11 wars who have died by suicide. According to statistics, that means every single day in the United States, 22 veterans succumb to suicide, losing their personal battle to the invisible wounds of war. And we must remember them. All across America on Memorial Day today, we hope our nation will come together to honor these men and women, some celebrated, some quite unknown, but each a patriot and a hero. But it is important that we pause to remember them, and in remembering, to honor their selfless sacrifice. One way our small community in Granbury, Texas remembers and honors our military is through our Honoring Hometown Heroes banner program and a field of flags, remembrance and honor. There are hundreds of flags with tags and banners with pictures of heroes in the field, each representing some individual or some unit or some branch of service. This represents a real community effort of remembrance and of honor. And why do we do events like this? Is it worth the time, the effort, the money? Well, as you watch people walk through that field, stop and read the tags, and look at the faces on the banners, and you see their reactions, you know it is worth it. And we must never, ever forget the families of our fallen. Long after the battle is ended, the children of our fallen warriors will still be missing a parent. Spouses, like me, will still be without their life partners. siblings like my daughter will be without a brother or a sister, and parents like me will continue to grieve for their heroic sons and daughters who died way too early. Sometimes when a loved one is killed in battle, a family member might ask if he or she was fighting for, was it worth it, or did they die in vain? Of course, only the person actually making the sacrifices can actually answer that question, so it's up to us to make absolutely sure it is worth it, because together we can make a difference. May God bless the United States and all the American heroes that we honor today. And may we always remember and be thankful to those who still stay at the ready, our military and our first responders. And may we and our leaders and those elected to represent us find the wisdom as a people, as a community, as a nation to do what is right for tomorrow. And may you resolve to make an effort every single day to remember and honor our fallen heroes and their families, and let them know you appreciate their service and their sacrifice. So here's to Casey and Larry, and Casey's fellow fallen Rangers, and Larry's comrades who served in Vietnam, and to all who have come before them, our World War II veterans, and to all who have made the ultimate sacrifice since then, and who will in the future. I'd like to close with a poem by Amanda Gorman, written as a salute to our military at 2022 Super Bowl. Let us walk with these warriors, charge on with these champions, and carry forth the call of our captains. We celebrate and honor them by acting with courage and with compassion, by doing what is right and what is just. For while we honor and remember them today, it is they who every day have honored us. Please never forget their commitment and always remember their sacrifice. Thank you.